The Ottoman Decline Thesis or Ottoman Decline Paradigm refers to a now obsolete historical narrative which had once been utilized to explain the history of the Ottoman Empire. According to the Decline Thesis, following a golden age associated with the reign of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent, the empire entered into a period of all-encompassing stagnation and decline from which it was never able to recover, lasting until the empire's dissolution in 1923. This thesis was used throughout most of the 20th century as the basis of both Western and Republican Turkish understanding of Ottoman history. However, by 1978, historians had begun to re-examine the fundamental assumptions of the Decline Thesis. After the publication of numerous new studies throughout the 80s, 90s, and 00, and the re-examination of Ottoman history through the use of previously untapped sources and methodologies, academic historians of the Ottoman Empire achieved a consensus that the entire notion of Ottoman decline was a myth, that in fact, the Ottoman Empire did not stagnate or decline at all, but rather continued to be a vigorous and dynamic state long after the death of Süleyman the Magnificent. The idea of Ottoman decline has been criticized as teleological, regressive, Orientalist, simplistic, and one-dimensional. Scholars have thus learned better than to discuss. Despite this dramatic paradigm shift among professional historians, the Decline Thesis continues to maintain a dominating presence in popular history, as well as academic history written by scholars who are not specialists in the Ottoman Empire. The origins of the Decline Thesis. In the Ottoman Empire, the idea of decline first emerged among the Ottomans themselves, beginning much earlier, but greatly expanding during the 17th century, was the literary genre of nasihatname, or advice for kings. Quote, "This genre had a long history, appearing in earlier Muslim empires such as those of the Seljuks and Abbasids. Nasihatname literature was primarily concerned with order and disorder in state and society. It conceptualized the ruler as the embodiment of justice, whose duty it was to ensure that his subjects would receive the justice. This was often expressed through the concept of the circle of justice. In this conception, the provision of justice by the ruler to his subjects would allow those subjects to prosper, strengthening the ruler in turn. Should this break down, society would cease to properly function. Thus many Ottomans writing in this genre, such as Mustafa Ali, described the reign of Süleyman as the most perfect manifestation of this system of justice, and put forth the idea that the empire had since declined from that golden standard. These writers viewed the changes which the empire had undergone as an inherently negative corruption of an idealized Suleymanic past. However, it is now recognized that rather than simply describing objective reality, they were often utilizing the genre of decline to voice their own personal complaints. For instance, Mustafa Ali's belief that the empire was declining was in large part motivated by frustration at his own failure to achieve promotions and court patronage. The primary goal of the nasihatname writers, then, may have simply been to protect their own personal class status in a rapidly changing world. In Western Europe, the notion of an all-encompassing Ottoman decline did not enter Western historiography until the early 19th century, with the works of historians such as Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall, who knew Ottoman Turkish and adopted the idea directly from Ottoman nasihatname writers. Internal decline was thus thought of as an appropriate means of explaining the Ottomans' external military defeats, and acted also as a justification for European imperialism. The trope of a declining Ottoman Empire was thus used as a foil for Western civilization, in which the decadent Ottomans were contrasted with the dynamic, West. Such views were perpetuated during the mid-20th century by the works of H. A. Gibbon, Harold Bowen, and particularly Bernard Lewis. These views came under increasing criticism as historians began to re-examine their own fundamental assumptions about Ottoman and Islamic history, particularly after the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism in 1978. It was from this point that skepticism of the decline thesis began to grow. The thesis tenets. The most prominent writer on Ottoman decline is the historian Bernard Lewis, who believes that the Ottoman Empire experienced all-encompassing decline affecting government, society, and civilization. He laid out his views in the 1958 article, Some Reflections on the Decline of the Ottoman Empire, which developed into the mainstream opinion of Orientalist scholars of the mid-20th century. However, as must be stressed, the article is now highly criticized and no longer considered accurate by modern historians. Lewis's views were as follows. The first 10 sultans of the Ottoman Empire were of excellent personal quality, while those who came after Suleiman were without exception incompetents, degenerates, and misfits, a result of the Café system of succession, whereby dynastic princes no longer gained experience in provincial government before coming to the throne. Faulty leadership at the top led to decay in all branches of government. The bureaucracy ceased to function effectively, and the quality of the records worsened. The Ottoman military lost its strength and began to experience defeats on the battlefield. They ceased to keep up with the advances of European military science, and consequently suffered territorial losses. As Ottoman state and society was geared towards constant expansion, the sudden failure to achieve new conquests left the empire unable to adapt to its new relationship with Europe. Economically, the empire was undermined by the discovery of the New World and the subsequent shift in the economic balance between the Mediterranean and Atlantic Europe, as well as the voyages of discovery which brought Europeans to India, and led to a decline in the volume of trade passing through Ottoman ports. In addition, the price revolution led to the destabilization of Ottoman coinage and a severe fiscal crisis, which proved disastrous when paired with the rapidly rising costs of warfare. As the cavalry army of the Ottomans became obsolete, the Timur system of land tenure which had sustained it fell into obsolescence, while the corrupt bureaucracy was unable to replace it with a functional alternative. Instead, tax farming was introduced, leading to corruption and oppression of the peasantry, and agricultural decline. Ottoman economic and military backwardness was extenuated by the closed-mindedness and unwillingness to adopt European innovations, as well as an increasing disdain for practical science. Ultimately, the Ottoman Empire reverted to a medieval state, with a medieval mentality and a medieval economy, but with the added burden of a bureaucracy and a standing army which no medieval state had ever had to bear. Refutation of the decline thesis. Political. In re-examining the notion of political decline in the Ottoman Empire, historians first examined the not yet named texts which had formed the backbone of the decline thesis. Scholars pointed out that these Ottoman writers' critiques of contemporary society were not uninfluenced by their own biases, and criticized earlier historians for taking them at face value without any critical analysis. Furthermore, complaint about the times was in fact a literary trope in Ottoman society, and also existed during the period of the so-called Golden Age, stretching back at least as far as the time of Bayezid. For Ottoman writers, decline was a trope which allowed them to pass judgment on contemporary state and society, rather than a description of objective reality. Thus, these works should not be taken as evidence of actual Ottoman decline. Other tropes of political decline, such as the notion that the sultans ruling after the time of Süleyman I were less competent rulers, have also been challenged. The reigns of such figures as Ahmed I, Osman II, and Mehmed IV have been re-examined in the context of the conditions of their own respective eras, rather than by inappropriately comparing them with the mythical Suleymanic ideal. Indeed, the very notion of whether Suleiman's reign constituted a golden age in the first place has come into question. The fact that sultans no longer personally accompanied the army on military campaigns is no longer criticized, but seen as a positive and necessary change resulting from the empire's transformation into a sedentary imperial polity. Research on the political role of women in the Ottoman dynasty has demonstrated the inaccuracy of the assumption that the so-called Sultanate of women, in which female members of the dynasty exercised an unusually high degree of power, was in some way either a cause or a symptom of imperial weakness. On the contrary, Ottoman valet sultans, princesses, and concubines were successfully able to fortify dynastic rule during periods of instability, and played an important role in dynastic legitimization. Furthermore, the importance of the rapidly expanding bureaucracy is now particularly emphasized as a source of stability and strength for the empire during the 17th and 18th centuries. Military. One of the most enduring claims of the Decline Thesis is that of the weakness of the Ottoman military in the post-Suleymanic period. Supposedly, the once feared Janissary corps became corrupted as they increasingly earned privileges for themselves, gaining the right to marry, sire children, and enroll those children into the corps. Rather than maintaining strict military discipline, they began to take up professions as merchants and shopkeepers in order to supplement their income, thus losing the military edge. However, it is now understood that Janissary participation in the economy was not limited to the post-Suleymanic period. Janissaries were engaging in commerce as early as the 15th century, without any apparent impact on the military discipline. Furthermore, far from losing the military effectiveness, the Janissaries continued to remain one of the most innovative forces in Europe, introducing the tactic of volley fire alongside and perhaps even earlier than most European armies. Even greater attention has been given to the changes experienced by the Timur system during this era. The breakdown of the Timur system is now seen not as a result of incompetent administration, but as a conscious policy meant to help the empire adapt to the increasingly monetized economy of the late 16th century. Thus, far from being a symptom of decline, this was part of a process of military and fiscal modernization. The army of cavalry which the Timur system had produced was becoming increasingly obsolete by the 17th century, and this transformation allowed the Ottomans to instead raise large armies of musket-wielding infantry, thereby maintaining the military competitiveness. In terms of armament production and weapons technology, the Ottomans remained roughly equivalent with their European rivals throughout most of the 17th and 18th centuries. The theory that Ottoman cannon foundries neglected mobile field guns by producing oversized siege cannon at a disproportionate rate has been debunked, despite the Orientalistic claim that an inherent conservatism in Islam prevented the Ottomans from adopting European military innovations. It is now known that the Ottomans were receptive to foreign techniques and inventions, and continued to employ European renegades and technical experts throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. In terms of productive capacity, the Ottomans were even able to surpass the European European rivals during the 17th century. They maintained full self-sufficiency in gunpowder production until the late 18th century, and with rare and brief exceptions were continually able to produce enough cannon and muskets to supply the whole armed forces as well as surplus stockpiles. According to the military historian Gábor Gostin, Ottoman defeats in the 1683–99 and 1768–74 wars with the Habsburgs and Russia are best explained by the strain on logistics and communications, caused by multi-front warfare rather than Ottoman inferiority in technology and armaments. As such, inferiority, insofar as it existed at all, was far less significant than had formerly been believed. Rhodes Murphy likewise argues that defeat in the 1683–1699 war was attributable to the fact that the Ottomans were forced to fight a multi-front war against a much larger coalition of European powers than ever before, rather than to the existence of any sort of military or technological inferiority. Economic and fiscal historians such as the above-mentioned Bernard Lewis once referred to the supposed fall in the quality of the empire's bureaucratic records as an indication of stagnation in the Ottoman administrative apparatus. Historians now recognize that no such decline ever occurred. This change in record-keeping was attributable not to loss in quality, but to a change in the nature of land assessment. As the empire adjusted to the increasingly monetized economy characteristic of the 17th century, the assessment methods in use under Sultan Süleyman were well suited to ensuring proper distribution of revenues to the army of feudal cavalry that then made up the bulk of Ottoman forces. However, by the turn of the century, the need for cash to raise armies of musket-wielding infantry led the central government to reform its system of land tenure, and to expand the practice of tax farming, which was also a common method of revenue-raising in contemporary Europe. In fact, the 17th century was a period of significant expansion in the Ottoman bureaucracy, not contraction or decline. These changes, contrary to the claims of earlier historians, do not seem to have led to widespread corruption or repression to a degree greater than that observable among the Ottoman Empire's European contemporaries. The Ottomans, like other European states, struggled throughout the 17th century to meet rapidly rising expenses, but by its end were able to institute reforms which allowed them to enter the 18th century with a budget surplus. In the words of one historian, ascribing 17th-century Ottoman budgetary deficits to the decline of the empire leaves unexplained the cessation of these deficits in the 18th century. Other supposed manifestations of Ottoman economic decline have also been challenged. The European circumnavigation of Africa and the opening of direct trade routes with India had a far less severe impact on the Ottoman economy than had once been argued. Ottoman revenue from the trade in Indian goods, such as spices, did not decrease to the degree that had been commonly assumed. The loss of revenue which did occur was made up for by the rise in the coffee trade from Yemen during the 17th century. While unable to eject the Portuguese from the Indian Ocean, the Ottomans were successfully able to prevent them from monopolizing its trade. The idea that Ottoman trade was in the process of falling under European control during the 17th and 18th centuries is now considered Eurocentric and inaccurate. Most trade within the empire was conducted by local merchants, primarily Muslims. The European mercantile presence was significant, particularly in rapidly expanding port cities such as Izmir, but by no means dominant. Ottoman industries, such as the production of cotton and silk textiles, also were able to recover from the economic downturn associated with the early 17th century. century. The empire's currency was destabilized after the debasement of the 1580s, and this instability continued into the 17th century. However, the 18th century was in fact a period of recovery for the Ottoman monetary system, indicating that the old thesis of continuous decline cannot be sustained. Alternatives to the decline thesis. Having dispensed with the notion of decline, modern historians of the Ottoman Empire most commonly refer to the post-Suleymanic period, or more widely the period from 1550 to 1700, as one of transformation. The role of economic and political crises in defining this period is crucial, but so too is the temporary nature, as the Ottoman state was ultimately able to survive and adapt to a changing world. Also of increasing emphasis is the place of the Ottoman Empire in comparative perspective, particularly with the states of Europe. While the Ottomans struggled with severe economic and fiscal downturn, so too did their European contemporaries. This period is frequently referred to as that of the general crisis of the 17th century, and thus the difficulties faced by the Ottoman Empire have been reframed not as unique to them, but as part of a general trend impacting the entire European and Mediterranean region. Politically, this era of transformation was characterized by a number of developments. Most significant was the proliferation of elite households modeled on the imperial household in Istanbul, whereas during the 16th century all political power had been centralized in the person of the Sultan. Now interlocking household relationships and the networks of patronage established by them became the focal point of political life. The factionalism that characterized this period has even been reinterpreted by one historian in terms of the expansion of the political nation and the limitation of royal authority. The new scholarly consensus on the post-Suleymanic period is thus aptly summarized as follows. Historians of the Ottoman Empire have rejected the narrative of decline in favor of one of crisis and adaptation. After weathering a wretched economic and demographic crisis in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the Ottoman Empire adjusted its character from that of a military conquest state to that of a territorially more stable, bureaucratic state whose chief concern was no longer conquering new territories but extracting revenue from the territories it already controlled, while shoring up its image as the bastion of Sunni Islam. Decline. In the popular imagination, despite the rejection of the decline thesis by professional historians, it continues to maintain a powerful influence over the common understanding of Ottoman history. The decline thesis is presented as fact in countless popular books and documentaries, as well as on Wikipedia itself, for the decline thesis is presented as the framework for all of Ottoman history. Many outdated and highly criticized scholarly works, such as Stanford Shaw's 1976 History of the Ottoman Empire in Modern Turkey, and Bernard Lewis's What Went Wrong, as well as those written by non-academics such as Lord Conross, The Ottoman Centuries, and André Koehne, Süleyman the Magnificent, remain popular despite academic recognition of their inaccuracies. Many non-professional historians have been led to Eurocentric conclusions stemming from an inability to keep up with the rapid advancement of scholarly literature, as well as frequently lacking the necessary language skills to read Ottoman primary source documents. Historians of Europe, when writing comparative history that includes the Ottomans, often end up repeating outdated stereotypes, as many remain unfamiliar with recent developments in Ottoman historiography. In light of these barriers to change, it may be a long time before the new scholarly consensus trickles down to replace the popular view.